Good morning and welcome to Talking Cannabis. Today we have Rick Doblin joining us today, and on the panel we have Tom. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
And good morning, Etienne.
Good morning, Todd. Good morning, Tom. It's great to be here today.
Good morning.
It is. So, for those of us smoking, I should say, for those of us watching, or for those watching, Rick Doblin has been a pioneer in research for almost 25 plus years now. His organization is called the Multidisciplinary Association for the Psychedelic Studies, and you can find them at maps.org. And they have been championing research into MDMA use and things like PTSD. And they have also been pushing for legal research with cannabis through the channels that should be doing the research. And Rick will be joining us in about 15 minutes. But till then, I was just, how are you guys doing today?
Great.
What have you been up to, Tom?
I just played some hockey. And then earlier this week, I appraised a half-acre cannabis field that had a dispute with the landowner, and they had to cut it down, so I had to appraise it. That was pretty interesting.
Wow. How, obviously through experience, you've seen a lot of outdoor cannabis. How much cannabis do you generally see on an outdoor plant at the end of harvest up in your area?
Well, this was planted late, so most of the plants were 6-7 feet tall at the most, but they were wide, and there was 650 plants, and the dispute was pretty interesting. I guess this is the norm in Calaveras County. The landowner had a written agreement with the grower, and the grower didn't post the legal notice. It was a legal approved plot. Didn't post the correct paperwork on the fence like they're supposed to, and so the authorities came and declared it illegal because the paperwork wasn't up on the fence. And so the landowner is suing the grower because they had to cut it down this week. And litigation is becoming big business for attorneys, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think they're the ones getting the wealthiest off of legalization, because every single application that goes to the state is getting touched by lawyers somewhere, which I think is a good thing. I mean, to be honest, I always kind of sarcastically called NORML the national organization for the referral of marijuana lawyers. And I also questioned how, basically motivated were a bunch of lawyers to legalize something that was their cash cow. And now the lawyers are more motivated than ever to work towards legalization because they can see the influx of business it's bringing them, and they don't have to stand next to someone like me in handcuffs going away for 5 years. They can stand next to somebody who's actually trying to do business in the city. So it changes the whole paradigm incredibly.
Well, and their paradigm has changed. It went from, having to actually go from preparing for defense cases to now they're litigating and arbitrating and writing contracts for, state, local situations. So even their whole world has completely changed from going from dealing with, prosecutions and having to prepare defenses to now going on the offensive for, business applications and because everybody has to be locally, at least in California, have to be locally registered before you can get your state situation. So, I mean, lots of local lawyers are making names for themselves. In fact, there's even a cannabis association of lawyers now. So,
yeah, the Cannabis Bar Association.
Yep, and that was started by one of my lawyers because
they
the
throw
growth.
Good parties. I've been to several of their parties.
They have to educate a lot of these. They've had to go through their exclusive training regarding their situation is challenging, because they have to Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
It happens. Yeah, no, the opportunities are great, and the lawyers have to mobilize because they serve an important purpose in this. And in some ways, I think it's good, and in other ways, I think it sucks. But you know, what can you do? It is exactly, it's life. But you know, I would rather see people litigating than shooting each other. And you know, you go back 20, 25 years, and the reality is the only way you handle a dispute with somebody who rips you off is to go handle the dispute. And now you can actually handle it in a much more civilized fashion. So I think that's a step in the right direction as well, because I think a lot of what got people sick of alcohol prohibition was the fact that the Al Capone types and the violence came up around the prohibition because there was no legal ends to deal with any type of, you know, disagreement in business. I lose you there, Etienne?
Yeah, sorry there. I had a headphone issue.
Oh.
I got it fixed now. Sorry. You're not the only one with technical issues.
It happens. So you were saying, Tom, that a lot of people are saying that the lawyers that you were contracted for or with to do where a lot of people are suing people up there?
Not a lot, but there's numerous ones. This is the second one that I've done there. But you know, it's becoming that if they don't abide by the regulations, then there's a problem, and then that throws a wrench into the legal agreement that the grower made with the landowner, and it's numerous times that has happened is what I'm hearing.
Let me gotta send this to Sam one more time.
So yes, regardless, the litigation reality is it's kind of the new front. And so as I was talking earlier about the lawyers, you know, they've started their own organization so that they can get together and educate other lawyers in other states, because some of these states are just coming online, as well as not many of these people have had, you know, expert in litigation or pardon me, in contracts and things like that. Whereas, you know, my lawyer, she's been fortunate to deal with, you know, winning in federal court. So that has given her also a knowledge base to educate and point lawyers in better directions on how they can better serve their clients and clientele, and then also to deal with this paradigm shift from, you know, as
Legal.
I said, from
legal to legal.
Correct. You know, going from on the defense to now being able to go on the offense to now writing legal documents to protect you and your clients. So it goes from, you know, preparing a defense to now NDAs. That's a significant change, as well as it's a lot more business for them because now they can go into, you know, they can enter with large scale contracts into dispensaries and other businesses. Whereas in the past, they've had to be very, very hush hush and have to be behind the scenes. Now they can actually go out and tout and be, you know, legal like any other type of business.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, they see us as a demographic, and that's what's important. I want to say good morning to Sam. Thanks for joining us.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
Good morning, good morning. Sorry we didn't get the link earlier. Yeah, it is good evening to her, to Amsterdam.
How are things in Amsterdam, Sam?
It's just about sunset.
Oh, how nice. Oh, nice. Well, stoned again. Today we're going to have Rick joining us in a little while, and Kenny will be back with us next week, but he is literally in the lab today, so we wish him well.
We send him our best and hope everything comes out wonderfully.
Yes, very fragrant. Sam, we're going to have Rick Doblin on today, and I was wondering if you had much experience working with maps.
Yes. Rick and I collaborated trying to get Donald Abrams his first funding and first cannabis, which would have come from me. But in the end, the DEA refused to allow me to import the 5 kilos that was to be used in the trial, so it got washed out in the end.
Well, they have blocked his attempts at getting research material for so long, and then when he got it, I believe, well, we could ask him about it, but I believe it failed the standard test that he needed it to pass, which was mold and
Well, that was
microbials.
Mississippi materials. I was going to send him materials that was grown in my facility. It was clean and safe. That wasn't the problem. The DEA just refused to allow me to be able to do that.
Right. Well, Rick had to run a little errand for his daughter, but we should have him on in a little while.
So Sam, just kind of questions regarding that. That was quite a long game to go there. That's not necessarily something that's just a quick call or decision. I mean, you have to go through actual proper channels to do that, correct?
To do what? To export and import into the United States from the? Is that what you're asking?
Correct.
Oh yeah. First of all, number one, it required a DEA license from that would allow Dr. Abrams to import it so that I could apply for the export license, and that was in the end unachievable.
Right. Right, because this is when would it be the Research Triangle Institute or the University of Mississippi? Because Rick wasn't not able to get it from them.
The University of Mississippi grew it, and the Research Triangle processed it if it was processed, which it all was.
Right. Everything I've seen has gone through the Research Triangle Institute.
A question, Sam. Was it? Were you going to prepare it the same way that NIDA did, or was it going to go in whole plant?
No, we're not going to prepare it how NIDA does. NIDA, what they do is the first thing they do is they break it all up and sift it to remove what they call fines, which is all the resin from the buds, or a lot of it, because that gums up their cigarette rolling machine. I would not have supplied it as pre-rolled cigarettes, but if they were, I'd have had them done by hand so that it was 10% or 20% marijuana, and
not pre-shaken.
1 or 2%.
I've seen cans of LV that were literally processed in 2009 and given to her in like 2013, and because it has the date of manufacture and then the date of her prescription, and what the hell is the logic in them sitting on it for 4 or 5 years?
Well, the truth of it is, the majority of the cannabinoids are still intact. If it's been stored under frozen storage or something like that, that's true. But the terpenes, they're long gone.
They do have her cannabis has a very interesting smell to it that is unique, to say the least.
That's probably terpene free.
Yeah, it's pretty terpene free. It always has kind of an acrid smell to it. I would, whenever I was around her, I would never allow her to smoke it around me for the most part, because it was just very harsh smoke. But again, yeah, you're right. She's had stuff that's been processed 10 years difference. I've got a can over here. There's definitely years difference from when it was processed to when it was actually received and used. And the condition and quality is, again, seeds and stems of a low quality cannabis as pre-sifted, that's then rolled in heavy Pall Mall, paper. And it's just really disappointing. It's because I was so excited when I finally heard what it was, and when I finally got to see government-grown cannabis, and after hearing all the bullshit rumors about G13, this supposed strain, the government marijuana from Mississippi, and you hear all this hearsay, conjecture, and rumor through smoking circles all around the country that I'd been through, and then to actually see what the University of Mississippi was producing was beyond disheartening. And as we know over time, they willfully don't. In other states, they grow well. If you've had welcome, Mel. Within this this realm
Can you turn down the volume on your machine?
for it in the legal realm. And
Oh, you got to turn off the YouTube channel there.
yeah, just turn down the volume on the YouTube.
Or kill the YouTube, yeah.
Moving to other places now. And
Maybe no.
they know in California they can't do what they're going to do. They don't want to be illegal, so they're going to other places in the world to grow and manufacture because it's just.
I muted him momentarily. When you figure out your volume, unmute yourself.
Yeah.
No? Yes? Oh no, now he can't unmute himself.
So again, just going to how disappointing I was disappointed. I can't imagine, Sam, how you were when you first saw, because didn't you get to actually go to the farm in Mississippi and see the farm itself?
Yes, but there I was able to see other things besides what NIDA had contracted for and what was being packaged up in those cigarette for the NIDA contract was in like you say, cans or big. I don't know what to describe it, like a. Well, you know what the cans look like. So.
The big 55-gallon barrels they put them in?
No.
Oh, the tins, the small tins, yes.
I'm talking about where there's 100 or 200 joints rolled.
Did you actually see where they...
Triangle Institute, though, they don't roll them at Mississippi, right?
Right,
they roll them in North Carolina at the Research Triangle Institute. A friend of mine does the rolling. Yes, he operates a machine.
And so you've been to the Research Triangle Institute and saw how all they're doing?
No, I have not been to the Research Triangle Institute. I was invited to the Mississippi garden facility run by Dr. El Sole, and they gave me the deluxe tour.
Wow. It would be a sight to see. What cultivation techniques do they employ in Mississippi? Is it all outdoors?
Yeah, it's outdoors, and in the past what they used was chemical NPK and just grew it straight outdoors. And it was a Mexican variety that was contracted for by the NIDA, so it was all really consistent year after year after year. It was garbage.
What'd they do? Just pick a seed out of a batch from Mexico?
No, they would have grown from seed.
I'm not sure before they grew their first standardized Mexican crop if they tried to look at different varieties, or I really don't know that. I just know that that's what the NIDA wanted, and that's what Dr. Sole grew for them.
Did they call it anything, or they just said it was just of a Mexican origin?
I don't know, but you could ask him, and he would answer you with, I assume.
I have a dumb question. Have they ever released public information about like what the cost of production was at the University of Mississippi for the material they were making?
All that's publicly paid for by the NIDA, and that's available absolutely, probably easily, and if not under Freedom of Information Act, absolutely.
That would be interesting information. Can I ask you, is cost of production something that has come up with you in the work you've done? Is cost of production something that is actually even taken into consideration?
Not directly, but indirectly, yes. For example, if your buds are super leafy and it's more expensive to manage it, the costs go up. So I always bred for a high flower to leaf ratio and a high resin to leaf ratio, but indirectly, not directly. No, I never cared about those kinds of issues because my focus was amounts of cannabis myself. It was always developing varieties suitable for that type of work.
Right. Right. You're a bigger picture for sure. I just think that that's something that's kind of coming into the conversation, because I think that's really what's going to drive out small growers, because they never had to think about cost of production before, because their profit margins were so absolutely huge. But now that's absolutely changing, and to be able to run a small garden on profit margins that are seen in more traditional agricultural crops would be close to impossible.
Well, I would say the first rule is efficiency of scale. In other words, if you grow 100 plants, then your costs are going to be a lot more expensive than if you grow 100,000.
Right. And that is going to be what I think changes everything, because when you have organic, dried tomatoes or strawberries or whatever you're looking at as a comparison, if they start streaming cannabis like that, and cannabis goes down. I mean, right now I was looking at the cost of organic dried tomatoes is about $9 a pound. That puts it down to about 2 cents a gram, 50 cents an ounce.
Yeah, well, wait until a whole paycheck and Amazon start delivering buds by drone for a really cheap price.
Actually, they just
organic buds I'm talking about.
they're not going to allow drone delivery in California, unfortunately.
Well, they'll still let a little guy come knock on my door and bring me weed, which will be just as cool.
Pretty much.
I'm pro Amazon delivering all sorts of good stuff.
Well, instead of drones, maybe you can parachute it from space.
As long as they hit my backyard and not take out my dog, I'm cool with that too.
As long as they leave my terpenes in place, that's all that matters.
But I think that's going to change the scope of things massively when cannabis gets treated like alcohol, and you can buy, whiskey from Lynchburg, Tennessee. I mean, this is going to really change the way that cannabis is sold and purchased on a massive level. Sorry, I'm over here conversing with Mel Frank as we talk, and he's
we're already
funnier in silence than he is.
Well, we're already seeing products that are already coming on the shelf that are actually, canned cannabis, which is nitrogen-infused cannabis, so that the terpenes and everything stay in place. We're already seeing availability for storage or long-term SKUs that can go on the shelf, as opposed to the little destroyed baggies that we had back in the day to go through. Now you're going to have to deal on top of that with child-proof packaging on top of that, because they want to make sure that your cannabis is not accessible to a child.
Right. Whatever happened to turkey bags, 5-gallon buckets, and burying it in your damn backyard? No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead,
Have
Jim.
you seen rosin on tap available at your dispensary, where either they squash buds for you, or you bring in your own buds and they squash
rosin?
Yeah, we've done that in Las Vegas. We have you can come squish your buds at our New Leaf location. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's you can make your own, bring your own, and it's not as used as something as you would see back in the day in positronics yet, but it's just new services.
We can think of it, somebody will try to deliver it to us.
Right. The canned cannabis, I know the originator of canned cannabis, and he does infuse it with nitrogen. It's a very good grower, very clean grow. In fact, I visited it just about 2 weeks ago, and I have photographed his crops a number of times. Very serious, very clean operation. So he may be one of those small growers who actually does do well enough. Hopefully somebody will buy him out, one of the big companies, because that's going to happen. I mean, obviously. But I worry about the small growers.
When I ask you, can I ask you something? What do you mean, though? Because I saw canned cannabis in 1994 when I get it to Amsterdam, man. They even had a knockoff Campbell's label. So I'm not sure what you mean he originated it. This is old hat in Holland.
All right, it's been around for quite a while. I don't know if he was back that far, but
First time I saw canned cannabis.
I'd say I've known him since maybe 2010, and he was well established by that time. Yeah.
Sure. Maybe, you know, see, this is the thing. I think people do things around here and they think, hey, check it out. But the reality is other people were doing that shit
I saw
decades earlier.
nitrogen flushed canned cannabis in 1990.
No, I certainly didn't. It's new to me.
No, I finally saw the nitrogen fusing when I went to there's 4 packaging universities in the United States, and one of them happens to be here in the Bay Area at San Jose State University, and got to go there. And he had a coffee packaging machine, and it gives little spurts of nitrogen, and so he just converted that over into canning. And so this difference, I think, Todd, is the one that we saw over in the Netherlands was cannabis and other novelties in a large can, whereas opposed to this is about it was a pretty large can, as opposed to these are about the size of a tuna can nowadays. And they're coming with or a little larger to allow for the size of the buds. But it's
That's
definitely
what we're talking about, people.
Correct.
This is a can of blue cookies that was nitrogen packed, and pretty good stuff. Honestly, it really does a good job. After it really did a good job of preserving the cannabis, and on top of that, I like that it had a little lid for what you didn't use the rest of.
Yeah.
And is it a real can, or is it foil packed paper sidewalls?
It's a real can, and it seems to be ceramic lined, which I kind of liked a lot. So I think it was pretty good quality.
Same with this one here.
Yeah, we're seeing that. We're seeing now that manufacturers can actually will play with us, whereas in the past, none of them would actually want to, talk to us, or it would have to be done behind the scenes or, hushed behind closed doors. Now we can actually look at bringing cannabis to presentations in ways that we've never had access to before because of legal markets, as well as these are now SKUs. These are going into regular stores and or dispensaries currently, or will in the future. And so, as opposed to in the past, we were the ones packaging things into grams, eighths, and ounces. Now it's on us. It's now coming to us packaged in tins. It's now coming in boxes, in different ways of access.
But this is necessary.
Absolutely, it's necessary.
Because when you talk to growers that I've talked to, and some are saying they have outdoor from last year, and I don't know what they're going to do with their outdoor from this year if they already got outdoor from last year. They have to find ways that store it that are really going to work. Hey, welcome to Talking Cannabis, Rick.
Hello.
You're always smiling. Where are you?
Well, I'm actually home here in Belmont, outside of Boston. I leave on Tuesday for Prague, and I just got back from Boulder a few days ago.
Well, welcome home for a minute.
Yeah.
I think everybody on the board here. You've got Etienne and Sam the Skunk Man and Mel Frank. And I don't know, but if you've met Tom Alexander was the publisher of Sensimilia Tips for 10 years, from 80 to 90, and then Growing Edge from 1990 to 2011.
Oh, good to meet.
I think we met once, back east in Washington, D.C. or somewhere.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, Rick?
Yeah, first let me just apologize for being late. My daughter she's going to college for her first year in Pennsylvania, and a friend of hers here lost her father years ago in a suicide, and then her mother died of cancer, and she's only had a dog that her father gave her, and the dog just had to be put down just a day ago. So my daughter came up for the weekend just to be with her friend, and they wanted to have a surprise, so I needed to wait for them to coordinate so this would be a surprise. So I thought I'd be doing it earlier, so that's why I'm late. So I apologize for that. But what I've been doing lately, well, I'll say the most recent and important things is that I have a connection to the Secretary of the VA, one of his senior advisors. And we've been trying to get pressure on the Phoenix VA because we have a marijuana study with veterans, 76 veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. and 4 different kinds of marijuana, all from NIDA. None of them very good, but we've had trouble recruiting veterans because the Phoenix VA has refused to help us because they say it's an illegal drug. And we're like, it's not an illegal study. We have DEA approval. We have NIDA approval. We've got $2.1 million grant from the state of Colorado. And so it's completely legit. And so we've had to go all the way up to the Secretary of the VA to try to get pressure on the hospital director of the Phoenix VA so that Sue Sisley, who's the principal investigator, can get into the VA and give a grand rounds talk and educate their people and then put flyers up so they'll refer veterans. So I think we've got a good chance of reversing this policy because there is no law that prevents them from doing this. There's no good reason for them to do this. Veterans are using marijuana for PTSD. They don't have any studies that have been ever done, controlled studies. They have a lot of anecdotal reports. So that's been a big preoccupation, is trying to figure out how to pressure the Phoenix VA to really cooperate with this study. And it's been 7 years that Sue and I have been trying to get the study together. We have 25 people already enrolled, though, of the 76. So we're already getting some good information. And some of the people who are using, we still don't know. We're not going to know till the end of the study which groups people were in. But some of the people are reporting substantial declines in their PTSD symptoms. So it's looking really interesting. But what we have is 12% THC that, according to NIDA, is their high THC. So all of us that know what real high THC means know that 12% is not a high THC. We had it independently tested, and it was only 9% THC.
Of course.
Then, yeah, of course, then they claim that it's 12%, and we go back and forth and like, well, show us your analytical data, which they refuse to do.
Nor will they show you the calibration of the machine prior.
Yeah, I mean, none of that. They say that their drug master file about how they make the marijuana is proprietary, and I'm like, it's public money. How can you say that this is proprietary? We're supposed to be studying marijuana. We need to know, are you blending different strains together to get these THC levels? It's really screwy. So, but it's
besides the percentage, the THC percentage, did you also test it for terpenes by any chance?
We did not, and they have no information on terpenes, and they, at least from what we understand, they blend different strains together just to try to get their THC and CBD levels. So the terpenes will be different it's just hard to replicate. It's terrible.
Well, dare I ask this? Did they pass any of the tests that, say, Berkeley would cause you to have to test them for, like molds and residual pesticides and such? Did you test for that?
We did. They didn't provide us any information on their mold levels. And we showed the mold levels were in excess of what multiple states would approve. And then we had.
That's what I was wondering. How did they do on residuals? Were they using pesticides and such that they shouldn't have been?
Well, we didn't find any of that. And then we didn't find, when we looked at the mold levels, we looked at aspergillus, we looked at harmful molds and didn't find any of that. And so then we had a difficult decision because this is the only source of federally legal marijuana. So either we use it or the study just ends. And so we felt that even though they were higher on mold levels, that it wasn't harmful mold and that we would go ahead and use it anyway. So there was a 12% THC that turned out to be 9%. There's a 12% CBD with virtually no THC. And then we wanted 12% THC, 12% CBD, but the best they could get us was like 7.9% THC, 7.9% CBD. And then there's a placebo where they alcohol wash the marijuana. And so it's got no cannabinoids. I'm not sure about the terpenes, but it washes out the cannabinoids. It smells different. It tastes different. People can tell, but that's what we need to do for placebo. So those are the 4 different kinds, strains in a sense, groups that people are in. and they have to wash out from marijuana if they're using it or if they're marijuana naive. And then we have 2 4-hour introductory sessions, because some people smoke pot and it makes them anxious. And we didn't want people who have trauma already to start freaking out. So we have 2 4-hour introductory sessions, one day after another, because sometimes people say they don't get high the first time. So we figured we'll do this 2 days in a row. Then they have 3 weeks of dosing, and they have to come back every week to get their week supply. The DEA wouldn't let us give them more than a week's supply. And they only get 1.8 grams per day. And they get a pipe that we provide. And so they can smoke as much or as little as they want at whatever time of day they want. And then they just let us know when they're using it. And then every day they give us back if they have any unused samples. And then at the end of the experiment, we give them back the same amounts that they gave us and extend the experiment. So this was designed to try to make it so they don't have an incentive to either use it all or sell it to their friends what they don't use or give it away. So whatever they don't use, they give it back, and then we extend the study at the end and give it to them. And so then there's this 3-week dosing, and then we have a 2-week cessation period where we want them to wash out of the marijuana. We want to see to what extent, if any, their PTSD symptoms come back. And then we give them another 3 weeks, and we alternate. So we don't have a placebo in the second 3 weeks. And people who had high THC will get either THC CBD or high CBD, and similarly. So we'll have people have 2 different kinds, and they'll tell us which ones they prefer. And then there's a 2-week cessation period after that second one, and then we check them 2 months after that. So that's the experiment. It'll take us another 1.5 years to be done with it, we hope. And then there's the crucial issue, which is, what if it works? What if it shows that it's valuable? Then how do we go forward? Because this NIDA marijuana is provided for research, but it cannot be sold as a medicine. And so it's unsuitable for phase 3 research, which is the research that's pivotal to prove safety and efficacy. So the FDA wants you to use the same drug.
If you had the terpene and cannabinoid profile, then you could recreate it either through breeding or through chemistry. So you could give the exact same compounds to the subjects or to the patients.
Well, we could, except for the fact that with FDA research, we can only use DEA, federally legal, federally licensed marijuana. So that gets back to the second thing that we've been doing, which is we have to end the government monopoly on federally legal marijuana. And that's been in existence since 1968 at University of Mississippi, now led by Professor El Soli.
Well, dare I say this, Rick, you kind of prove the point I've made for decades, that I never felt like they wanted to prove that it works. I mean, I look at LV Musica's cans and Urban's cans, and sometimes they're 4 and 5 years between the manufacture date and the date that they handed them the cannabis as a prescription drug. And it makes no logical sense to me, other than them trying to defeat the program as well as they can.
Well, that's right. I mean,
there is not a single they. When it comes to the federal government and Mississippi University, some of these people absolutely want medical marijuana to be successful, whether it's isolated compounds or herbal cannabis or whatever. They believe in it as medicine. Other ones are 100% against it, would do everything they could to oppose and stop it.
Right.
I think that's a very important point, that there's not a single they. And that extends more from agency to agency. So the FDA is about curing illness and helping people that are suffering, and they're not part of the drug war right anymore. And so there's science over politics. NIDA has more been about proving what's bad about illegal drugs to justify prohibition. DEA has been about, limiting diversion and creating prisoners. So the big they, FDA, for us, is the opening wedge, because they're the ones that really want to see the science. And they have actually stood up to NIDA in the past, where NIDA said, don't approve any marijuana studies until we've agreed to give them the marijuana. And because we had several studies with Donald Abrams and Ethan Russo in the 90s that were approved by FDA, by institutional review boards, and then NIDA would refuse to provide the marijuana. And they looked bad because we said FDA and IRBs have approved it. And then NIDA tried to get FDA to stop approving protocols before they agreed to provide the marijuana. And I filed a complaint with the Ombudsman's office, and FDA rejected NIDA's request.
It was even beyond that. When we tried to import it from the Netherlands, it was refused by the DEA, I think at the urging of the NIDA.
Yeah, I mean, NIDA now is willing to get rid of the monopoly, though. And there was an article in the Washington Post recently about how the DEA is now willing to get rid of the monopoly, but Attorney General Sessions is preventing that from happening. So, you know, you may all know that last summer, the Obama administration and the DEA agreed to end the monopoly. And they put a statement about how their main argument was that international treaty obligations prevented them from issuing any licenses. And that was their argument for the past 30 years or so. And they ended up dismissing that with one paragraph saying, of course we can regulate in harmony with international treaties, and this is how we do it. And that for me was the most hilarious part, because they have spent documents and documents and pages of legal arguments trying to defend this idea of the international treaties block them from licensing other producers, and they just got rid of it within a paragraph and a half. It was just pathetic. But since then, around 20 different companies have submitted applications for licenses, and none of them have been awarded licenses. And so that's where we're now trying to work with various senators to pressure Attorney General Sessions to finally end the monopoly. Because in 2 years or so, when we're done with this marijuana PTSD study, and if we've got good results and we want to go to these pivotal studies, we just can't do it. And so it's the fundamental obstacle right now to make the marijuana plant into a federally legal medicine.
Well, you know,
it's
Rick,
even worse. It's even worse than you suspect, Rick. When a company I was working with, a UK company, large generic pharmaceutical company, tried to register a THC from naturally extracted cannabis, equivalent generic to the United States, the DEA refused to allow the FDA to do this because it was extracted from the natural plant. And if you look at the Controlled Substances Act, what's been rescheduled is THC mixed in a soft gelatin capsule and put in a gel with sesame oil. And that's all that was rescheduled. So when it was natural THC, they were able to stop it.
Yeah, I've heard that, and that's outrageous, because it's also, from what I understand, less expensive.
The molecule is identical.
Yeah, and because they're worried that might make them forced to reschedule marijuana, the plant.
Well, how can they not? This is my other stupid question. I mean, dronabinol was the first of all substances to get downscheduled in the CSA back in July of '99. I don't know of any other drugs they've done that with, but I don't follow other drugs like I do cannabis.
They've done it with...
It was developed by the NIDA, and they sold it to Unimed.
Yeah. Yeah, it was federally funded, most of the research, and they needed a private sponsor.
Absolutely true.
So they could federally fund a lot of stuff now that they're refusing to do. Ibogaine research, MDMA research, marijuana research. We've got no federal funding for any of that.
Do you think that the legislation in California is going to have any weight on the federal government to reclassify cannabis?
I don't think so at all, because the way they've got the system set up, you know, and we went through this with Lester Greenspan and others in the 80s, is how do drugs get rescheduled, and can we force the DEA and the Attorney General to do it? And so it started with the lawsuit with MDMA, where the judge said MDMA should be Schedule 3, and the DEA claimed that they didn't have the authority to reschedule, only the FDA did. So what I've learned about DEA lawyers is that they don't care if their arguments are any good. They just care if they delay the process. So we sued them in the appeals court, and the appeals court said that the Controlled Substances Act clearly says the Attorney General and the Secretary of HHS can reschedule. So they threw it back to the DEA. And then the DEA came with this 8-part standard. And that's what they said they used. And that's why MDMA had to stay in Schedule 1, because it didn't meet this 8-part standard. So we sued them again in the appeals court. And the appeals court said this 8-part standard is essentially identical to what the FDA has to find. And the Congress didn't mean, if they gave it to the Attorney General and the HHS, that it should be the exact same standard. So that's invalid, and you have to come up with something again. So then there was the whole marijuana rescheduling, and it was the same issue. And so Lester was the one that sort of led this effort to challenge in the appeals court again. And the DEA came up with this 5-part standard that was what they used. And it was different enough from FDA, but it still included phase 3 studies. So essentially, the court agreed with it finally. And so essentially, there's no way to force the DEA or the Attorney General to reschedule unless the FDA has said that these phase 3 studies have proven safety and efficacy. So I think nothing that's going to be done at the state level in California or elsewhere can force federal rescheduling. And as long as the NIDA monopoly is in existence, and the other part is that this importation, we can break the government monopoly by importing marijuana, but none of the companies, not GW Pharmaceuticals, because they don't want research with the plant to compare against side effects or Epidiolex. Also, Bedrocan, none of the Canadian companies, Privateer, Tilray have decided not to open up the drug master file. So at this moment, there's nobody we can import from, nobody that has met the FDA standards, and we can't use NIDA marijuana either. So it's a fundamental obstruction that still exists for marijuana research, which is
drug master file for cannabis was opened by me about 5 or 6 years before I worked with you.
Now, so you have a drug master file for?
Yeah, but I'm retired, Rick. I'm really the wrong guy to be bored by medical cannabis. My focus is really recreational. The hell with them.
Right. Rick, about 2 weeks ago, Ed Rosenthal came back from University of Mississippi, where he was with El Soli, and they asked him and another grower to come down because they had an order from the DEA for 5 pounds of marijuana, and they were freaking out about doing it. Freaking out because they didn't know what they were doing. And so Ed told me that it was just an absolute laughable how bad the growing was going down there. Wow. I don't know how it is now. I don't know if he helped at all, but he said it was a joke. It really was. And to think that he's been in this, since what, the 70s? Yeah. Maybe the early 80s, El Soli?
I hardly know what to say.
He's been around this all this time. He doesn't know how to grow a basic plant.
I have seen photographs of plants they grew that looked absolutely beautiful.
Really?
Every time.
Well, they're trying to grow these under lights.
Yeah, the ones I'm talking about were grown under lights. They were cloning. They were doing everything everybody else was doing.
They should be, yeah.
Well, I guess I'm unclear why they have 12% THC as their highest potency marijuana.
Yeah.
Or THC, but I think the problem is that they really have no incentive to provide marijuana of high enough quality.
Well, can I just point out? I think that their end game is in delay because the people. See, personally, I don't know. I think that, we all are well and good trying to do the right thing, but I think there are a lot of darker for-profit companies that are, hovering over the politicians that dictate what the policies are, and they don't want to see what we're doing actually vindicated and they don't want to see cannabis become a competitor in the markets they already dominate. So, you know, I think that delay is actually their whole plan.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, that's how you understand the strategy, because they will make legal arguments that will be overturned, but the legal process takes years.
Right.
And so I think we've got them cornered in a lot of ways, where they've at least acknowledged that the international treaty obligations don't make sense, and that they're just a ruse they've been hiding behind. But it's Sessions who's now the problem, and supported by Trump. But I have one question for most of you here, which is, I think, the big issue for me going forward. And I think you guys are some of the best ones to answer this question, or at least to talk about it, which is, does it make sense to try to make marijuana into a federally approved medicine? And, you know, there's been arguments that I've heard that it would, if that happens, then the FDA might require all state level producers to meet federal production standards, or, you know, I think that from the point of view of doing it in a nonprofit context, to make the marijuana bud into a medicine in what will become generic form, it'll be super cheap. It'll be a block against what other pharmaceutical companies could charge for it. But I've spoken to Rob Campia, to Ethan Nadelman, and to others, and they say it's going to cost 20 or 25 million to make MDMA into make marijuana into a prescription medicine if we had a federally legal supply. And that money would be better spent legalizing marijuana in a bunch more states. And I have a hard time disagreeing with that. So then the question is, if we could do it in a for-profit, but not a regular for-profit, but a benefit corp, where you maximize social benefit, not profits. If we could make marijuana into a federally legal medicine in a for-profit context, you get 3 years of what's called data exclusivity, which means that nobody can use your data for generics for 3 years. And then also, hopefully, you would have insurance coverage. And so that's my thought, is that if we can end this NIDA monopoly, and if Professor Craker at UMass Amherst, who we've been working with since 2000, and others, because we're not trying to create a MAPS monopoly, if the other people get licenses too, then we could reasonably try to make it through investments. But then the question is, are insurance companies going to cover state legal marijuana eventually when they realize it's in their best interests? And
But can I just point this out? I mean, we're not talking about a specific kind of whiskey or something that is difficult and needs a laboratory to be produced. My grandmother accidentally grew pot one year. I mean, this is the reality.
Was that your pot, or?
She knew where my seeds were. And to be truthful, when I first started growing and my grandmother embraced the fact that I had plants, she let me put them in the basement. And she would water them for me on the way to the washer and dryer, and everything was groovy. Well, then they finished. And one night at like 12 midnight, I went downstairs and I harvested. And back then I would just, you know, start from more seeds. And she got up in the morning and all the plants were cut down. And when I came downstairs to go to school, she was pissed off at me. She was like, why did you cut down all the plants? Because she had been watering them for a while and she'd grown attached to them. So she told me she was going to plant her own goddamn plants and I better not touch them. So I didn't really think of anything, but she had roses in the backyard under her window in her bedroom, and she broadcast a bunch of seeds that she found in a can, and they took. And I was out there one day, and my grandmother was really, amusingly enough, she had thrown so many of them out there that they were coming up like a hedge, and she was just snipping them like she used to her roses to keep them under her window. So she had this really cool bush of cannabis going. And that, to me, is the greatest obstacle to trying to prohibit this, because as the information gets out and we all understand its therapeutic value, why would we embrace some government organized distribution system when we could just ask grandma to kick it, you know, with her roses and grow us some extra pot?
Okay, but Todd, if there's some really older straight patients there want to buy the medicine, they want it to be, you know, produced in some sort of FDA approved, controlled manner, it makes them feel better, then I say it's different strokes for different patients, and we should do everything we can to enable them to get what they want.
Absolutely, but not if it means that we go back to losing our freedoms to be able to, have our grandma grow a little bit of grass in the backyard because they're worrying about taxes. And, we don't want to see what's happening in Canada happen here, which is legal producers leaning on the cops to take out the people that are not legal producers because they're competition.
Canada, because in Canada, one thing that's good is you can grow it in BC and sell it in Ontario, for example. They have a cross-province system, whereas America, if you're in one state, you can't sell it in another state. In most cases, you can't even transport it to another state.
So it sounds like, Rick, you're caught between the dilemma of research and the reality of, legalization that has come forward, because we've always stated and we know that we need more research. And I'm a combat veteran with PTSD, and I know what cannabis has done for me, and you and I have talked about it years in the past. But it's absolutely frustrating to still see that even with your proper research and doing everything, Dr. Sue Sisley was doing everything properly, and she got kicked out of, that state and had to actually go to Colorado to get her funding, even after she had done everything proper and by the channels. And
let me just say one quick thing. Sorry to interrupt, but just that there's $17 million in money in Arizona that they've collected from taxes that has not been spent on research, and it's sitting there. And the legislature wants to spend it on educating young people about how bad marijuana is, and they want to take it for other things, but the law was written they can't. But there's exactly right. There's right now, Sue told me just a couple weeks ago, there's $17 million sitting in a fund paid for by medical marijuana and marijuana patients and purchasers in Arizona, and it's just locked up there.
And how does that make you feel as a researcher, knowing that that money is just going to sit there and gather further dust?
It's incredibly frustrating because, if we had those resources, $17 million combined with the 2.1 we got from Colorado and with a little bit more to set up a standardized supply, we could make it federally legal. I believe, and this gets to be back to this idea that there's no they there. I have found that I believe we can trust the FDA to put science over politics, and it didn't used to be that way. They shut down psychedelic research. They shut down marijuana research into benefits for decades. But starting in 1992, they had an advisory committee, and they said science over politics. And ever since then, for the last basically 35 years, they've been trustworthy when it comes to, or 25 years, sorry, they've been trustworthy when it comes to putting science over politics with marijuana and psychedelic research. It's just this monopoly that's the big obstacle.
But you saw that the university there got involved, so they're part of the they. They're the ones who kicked Dr. Sue Sisley out, even after she had done everything proper and, dotted all the I's and crossed the T's and tried to do everything properly, and she still got scuttlebutted right in the 11th hour, 30th minute. So there's still, behind the scenes chicanery that is going on that is led to this frustration, because we still have all these states saying to us, well, where's your research about medical marijuana? And I've been physically removed from 4 different VA facilities just for mentioning my medical marijuana use over the years, from starting back in 91 when I started to go to the VA and telling them about it. And it's been absolutely frustrating, and I've done nothing but follow what you have done with great fervor, because I knew I would never get any help for myself, but by supporting you and organizations and doctors and doing that firsthand, we could affect the change that was better for all. And so that's part of the long game. But you've been doing the long game for 30 years plus, and you've been doing this so proper. And here you are going to finally through these studies and realizing that the government's cannabis is still so contaminated that you can't even get to your phase 3 studies. Do you do what the Dutch government does and now then irradiate it so that you can get rid of the molds and mildews and things like that, but therefore affect the terpenes, whatever is left of terpenes that are there in the first place? So, you have, just as a researcher at that level deciding on the access of the cannabis, we're still caught up in that minutia after 30 plus fucking years, you're still at a wall of minutia that you're hoping to get through by your lifetime. And you know, there's research that could last decades of lifetimes.
Yeah, that's true.
And
But
I was going to ask this.
the alliance with veterans is what's going to help us turn the corner. And, you know, if we get the VA, the Secretary of the VA, to order the Phoenix VA to cooperate with our marijuana study, then the next step is to start trying to mobilize veterans and others to pressure Attorney General Sessions to end the monopoly.
The other thing you can do, Rick, is look at other companies such as Australia, South Africa, Uruguay, where they might be permitted to do these kinds of studies, which would give data to help back up the need for you to do it.
Or Israel. I mean, aren't you doing any working anything with Israel?
Well, we were doing some, you know, we helped through Dr. Bronner's and David Bronner. We helped start medical marijuana in Israel back well over a decade ago when they had to, when Tikkun Olam, when they had to give it away. You know, David donated about $100,000 to MAPS, and then we subsidized the production of marijuana in Israel because initially they had to give it away. Then they had to sell it at cost. Then they could sell it for profit, and then they could become for profit from non. So now they're in a great situation. And it is also true that the FDA will accept foreign data as part of the application to make a drug into a medicine.
That's the same company that declared a few years ago that they developed the first CBD only variety, correct?
Yeah, Tikkun Olam. We no longer work with them because there was some ethical issues I felt were going on.
I love that announcement since I had a pure CBD variety we developed a decade before that.
Yeah, they're.
Well, can I ask a question then? It's about real world use because you know, you were talking about sticking, you know, pot in a pipe, and it sounded so 1970s, you know, and I was wondering, you know, well, nothing against it.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely back in the 1970s.
That's pretty old school for sure. An acrylic bong, I haven't
even,
seen.
Not even a glass bong. That's
not
what I use.
Even a glass bong. But my question is we don't.
Well, I'll
really...
say it was a present of my children for their dad.
You would be the greatest dad, Rick. So, but my thought is that a lot of people, especially people with really serious medical conditions, are dabbing oils now. They use electronically heated nails. They have really particular temperatures that they actually vaporize the oil at. This has evolved a lot from sticking some herb in a pipe and hitting it with a Bic. So will we ever see research that reflects that? And I ask that because I think that there's two things that these high THC and high cannabinoid and high terpene oils have shown us, and it's two things. It's safety, because if there was any truth to the high THC claims that this is going to destroy our youth being true, then all of the big dab events and parties where they do nothing but smoke amazing amounts of high THC oil, you would have a bunch of people going to the hospital, and we don't have any of that. And then the second thing is effectivity, because sticking a little bit of herb in a pipe, yeah, that helped me when I had chemo, I remember it. But if I had had the ability to consume, you know, a couple 100 milligrams of THC in a single breath, that is a different level of medication that sticking some herb in a pipe doesn't really do. So will we ever see that kind of research?
Well, I think we will once we break the monopoly. And so the thing is that what you're talking about are non-smoking, different kind of delivery systems, different kind of products that can be patented. And so the for-profit pharmaceutical companies will develop that. They'll move beyond what GW is doing to just sublingual sprays. And so what I'm, as a nonprofit, what we're looking for is something that's in the public benefit, but that is generic and that isn't being developed otherwise, and that's not patentable. So the bud,
patentable is really, I don't see how. There's people that want to lay claim to the patentable process of extracting oils from plant material, but I think there's a lot of previous art that is gonna take them down when they try to stop anybody from stripping the oils off of the cannabis plant using any solvents, water included. So that is, I don't know. I think that BHO and PHO and water hash is very much in the public domain, and
yeah, I agree.
There's nothing they can do to stop it. So now that you have people literally able to make high quality extracts in their own backyard, how are you gonna, I mean, this is the other thing. Pharmaceutical companies cannot do to cannabis what they have done to every other drug, because we don't need a lab to produce it.
Yeah, well, also if you look at alcohol, though, I mean, people still have the right to produce a certain amount of alcohol at home, grow your own, make your own beer. You can grow grapes and make wine. So I think that we need to protect home grow no matter what.
For sure, but there's still, even when we compare it to wine or alcohol, there's still a distillation and a refinement process that does not exist with cannabis. I literally go cut a flower off of a stem and literally put it on my desk for 2 weeks, come back, and it's usable material. So I'm sorry, but grapes, it's really not that complex of a process as it is to make alcohol. And that, I think, is a huge stumbling block for prohibiting it, because isn't that what has allowed the black market to foster so well, because it's so easy to produce?
Yes, but then we get to the question about insurance coverage. So if you make it into a medicine approved by FDA, insurance will cover it. And right now, I'm not aware of insurance covering much of the marijuana that people are buying, even in medical marijuana states. So I think that's, yeah. I know in Canada, the Canadian government is paying for veterans with PTSD to use their marijuana. If veterans have PTSD and they use marijuana in Canada, the government will pay for the marijuana.
Some insurance companies do pay for it in the Netherlands,
yes.
But another way to look at it is you don't need insurance companies to pay for it if you could grow it for pennies to the gram.
Well, that's true. And I think you should always be. But there's just a lot of people. Well, here's a funny little story. And I think maybe it illustrates. So my oldest son, he's now 22 in college. But when he was in high school, my wife went down to the kitchen in the morning. And he thought he was so slick. But he had left this order form. He was ordering mushrooms from the Netherlands to be mailed to our house. And not only that, but he had collected money from about 3 or 4 of his friends too. And he had a list of which friends gave him which money for which kinds of mushrooms. And we get down there and I'm like, you're having mushrooms from the Netherlands mailed to my house? How can you, and then I said, why didn't you get a spore kit? Because spores are legal. You could just grow it yourself. And he said, well, me and my friends, we just don't have the patience. I was like, you don't have any good sense either. And fortunately,
I hate to say this, Rick, I blame the parent. And this is what happens when you don't teach them how to easily cultivate their own psychedelic mushroom, and they go for a simpler source.
Right.
Well, I accept some of the blame there. And we tried to teach them about,
Also, Rick,
obvious stupid things, but I think as it relates to marijuana, a lot of people are not going to have the patience to grow their own. They're going to want to buy it.
Yeah, at the local 7-Eleven is where they're going to want to buy it.
And we've seen that, they want the convenience, on top of that, Rick, people want to buy pre-rolled joints and oil or pens so that it's easier for them to access. They want the convenience to go with it. But I think Todd is speaking greatly to the frustration is you can't even get the medical marijuana research done properly. So how the fuck are we going to actually get the research done on these most recent, allocations of these, cheap Chinese made products?
If we can't do it in America, we'll do it in Canada or the rest of the world. America can hold back America, but it can't hold back the world of cannabis. It's too late for that.
That's true.
I think that's right. And we like, for example, to switch just for a second to MDMA. So, we just had FDA declare MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD a breakthrough therapy. And we are moving into phase 3. And part of our phase 3 research is going to take place in Canada, and part of it is going to take place in Israel. And the FDA is going to accept that data. And then we're going to try to make it legal in the European Medicines Agency, and the EMA will accept a lot of the data that we produce for the FDA. So it is true that it's an international system now, but the problem is to get the FDA to accept international data. First off, they have to accept the product as a standardized product, and that hasn't happened yet. So no foreign producer has made the effort to get the FDA to say they have GMP, good manufacturing practices, medical grade marijuana. So at this second, no research that we do outside of the US is with FDA accepted, federally legal marijuana, either domestic or imported. So we're not in a position to do international research right now either.
Well, I applaud you for how much you've been pushing to make this happen. And, you know, I don't mean to dissuade you with any of my arguments of reality.
Yeah. Oh, well, no, I think it's good, but I think what Etienne was saying about the convenience too, you know, there will be, people should always be able to grow it themselves, but there will be patients that just found out they got cancer and now they want to smoke marijuana for nausea control and they don't have 2 months to wait to grow. There's going to be a massive...
Go ahead.
Down to my Christmas tree farm cannabis plant store and pick their own. I'll have them ripening 12 months a year. That's no problem. They're welcome.
Yeah, no, that would be great. So I guess I'd like to go back to this question is, you know, does it make sense? Let's assume we break the monopoly, which I think will happen. We just don't know when. And at least now we've got the DEA. They've abandoned their arguments about international treaties. There's no argument that there's an adequate supply by NIDA because NIDA clearly cannot provide for phase 3 and everybody accepts that. So all they've got, again, is delay. And that's what they're doing. They've not responded. They haven't rejected these applications that these 20 or so firms have submitted to grow federally legal marijuana. They've just done nothing. So they're in this delay process. And so now we're moving again to try to force sessions now that we've identified that even the DEA is open to it. And so I think eventually, you know, maybe it's going to take a new president, a new administration, but eventually there'll be these licenses. And then I think another reason I'm wanting to use the plant, and this sort of gets to some of the things, Todd, you've been saying, is that the plant is like what many people use. And I think the evidence that we get on research for medicine in the plant will apply towards legalization too. And I think the more that we do research in medicine and show that there's these conditions where it's safe and efficacious, and then all the fears and fantasies people have been told about the dangers will have to be double checked against the reality that now this is a medicine. And FDA has said, okay. So I think sticking with try the plant has sort of larger implications for the social discussion that we're having about legalization.
Well, then can I ask you about legalization? Because you've had your ear to the ground in DC for as long as I've known you. And does not this get to a point where the federal prohibition is unworkable if half of the states are implementing legal programs, either medical or adult use?
Well, it's only unworkable if you've got a majority of people in Congress willing to vote to legalize. And so I think that, you know, my guess, I'm not sure.
Well, I guess when I say unworkable, I mean this. We've already seen them back off prosecutions in these states. I mean, at the end of the day, the DEA can go raid and arrest people, but they still got to take them to a jury trial of their peers in their community. And that seems to be the stumbling block that a lot of them are dealing with because, you know, like we'll talk about Ed Rosenthal, for an instance, that was an absolute embarrassment to them. They don't want to repeat that over and over again. And if they start going into these states and taking out high profile players and putting them on trial and losing, then how unworkable is federal prohibition? And that's also why I think that they're not going after individuals like they did 20 years ago. They didn't try to take my house to stop me from growing cannabis. They came and arrested me, put me in prison. It was pretty effective. But now they're trying to take a person's house because they don't want to deal with the, you know, unpleasantries of potentially losing a jury trial with a human instead of a property as the defendant. So how is this changing in DC? Because there has to be the reality kind of coming in on them that their policy is coming to an end.
Well, I mean, particularly with Canada about to legalize too, so that if we have legal marijuana, but I'm curious what everybody thinks about when you think marijuana will actually become federally legal, because my guess right now is it's around 2025 or so. And so, you know, we know that it's the presidential election years where initiatives are more likely to pass. And I think we're going to need a bunch more states in 2020 and then a bunch more in 2024. And then maybe we'll have, as you're saying, Todd, you know, the majority of states and their representatives in Congress. But we're going to need years of watching how it works in each state.
I would only disagree in this. Never in my life would I have, well, let me thought this out. Never in my life would I. Go ahead, Sam.
Big business will be involved with cannabis, and they will push it right through Congress.
Yeah, but
you wait and
big
see.
business is already
Money
involved
speaks.
against cannabis, and that's what's been pushing prohibition through Congress, is large donations from pharmaceutical, alcohol,
Yeah,
tobacco,
but
oil.
Right? And we both know it's true, Todd.
Right. Yeah, no, we're on the same page. You know, my thought, as I was saying, though, was just that there has to be the reality striking in that this is not, it's not going to continue to be workable. And I hate to say this out loud, but it's going to take someone like a Trump that would come in and say everything we've been doing is wrong. And I mean, he's created a type of unpredictable political atmosphere that you don't know who's going to be running against him in 2020 or whatever. You don't know what kind of platforms they're going to have. And if cannabis is as popular as we see it is now, it could well be the point of the next presidential election if we make it. That would be what completely turns the tide, in my opinion, because all it would take is the popularity of the subject matter and someone that gets in who's a president that says, this has been wrong, we're not doing this anymore. Game over. Right?
When do you think it? I'm curious when everybody thinks it will actually become legal.
2024, 2028. I think whenever Newsom gets in, he goes to presidency. He's gonna have to do a term or two here in California, and he's gonna run on it, and he's gonna use that platform. I mean, he's already doing it in California, and seeing with other states and whatever. I mean, it does affect what actually happens in 2020 and 2024. Because if that momentum is built by other states the way that it has with medical marijuana, that could be a possibility. But it still has to be an embrace, as I agree with Sam, to these laws in these individual states, and they're going to want that interstate commerce, and that interstate commerce is going to be lobbied for.
I think it's going to be faster than we think.
Etienne, so you're saying 2028 is when you think?
I say between 2024 and 2028, when Gavin Newsom runs for president, he's gonna make sure that's part of the platform for the Democrats when he runs.
Okay,
that's my thought.
Tom, what are your thoughts?
I think it's going to be faster than any of us think. I think it's going to be 2020 to 2022. And then implementation will be another year or two, but it's going to be faster than any of us think, because so much money is being invested. If you know,
I think if the buds are good enough, it's truly maybe last year.
No, I think you're right. I go at what Tom's saying, because it's getting to a point where it's unworkable any other way. And they're going to have to follow suit. And wise politicians are going to come in. And I think Gavin might be a little late to the game, because looking at the popularity of cannabis right now across the country, I mean, let's look at Florida, for instance. They denied them medical cannabis after the first election because it didn't win by a majority. So they had to then put it back on the ballot, and they had to vote for it a second time. And the second time we saw it pass with 71% approval in a very conservative voting pool. So when you have that as a reality, I think every politician is going to have to take this very seriously, because now if you come out against medical cannabis, you potentially have, like in Florida, 71% of the voting pool saying, hey, F you.
Yeah, and now Morgan down in Florida the millionaire that backed medical down there, is saying he's going to run for governor, and that's going to be his main platform. I mean, we're going to see politicians come out, and that's going to be their main platform. And it's because so much money is being invested by Wall Street, by Silicon Valley, by LA venture capitalists, or vulture capitalists, as I call them. And it's going to become a job creator, and that's going to make the politicians support it, regardless of what the pharmaceuticals.
Well, it's already a job creator. We already employ more than the coal industry, more than twice the coal industry at its current status. So if we're able to turn more states, like I said, in 2020 and 2024, that's becomes more of a reality.
Does anybody think there can be interstate trade with cannabis before the feds change their rules?
Well, there is. Let's point out CBD, for instance. Who would have thought that was going to happen? I mean, whoever... I don't understand how people can both argue that CBD is a very effective cannabinoid and then argue that it's not a cannabinoid and it's not in the CSA and that it's not listed. It's just people are speaking up both sides of their mouth in this CBD industry, and they're seemingly getting away with it. So, yeah, cannabis products are being traded across state borders without, obviously, federal legalization, because I didn't get the memo that CBD was descheduled.
The focus of CBD is not for intoxication, and I think
it's not about it. Wait a minute.
It's real low priority.
Yeah, but let me point this out. I can't smoke a cannabis seed and get intoxicated, but that is controlled as a Schedule I substance. I mean, I had brilliant guys in Dutch seed
companies. It will help you grow something that is intoxicating in their mind.
Yeah, it's true. They're overlooking CBD. I mean, there is interstate commerce.
Makes no sense.
They're just overlooking it, and it's similar. It's the opposite in a way of delay. They're just doing nothing because they don't want to acknowledge what's going on. They don't know how to make it. But I'm curious about some of the rest of the people. Like, when you think it'll be legal?
I think we're going to see. I personally think this is going to be a major issue in the next presidential election, and I think that there's no way it could go. There's too many people that are now utilizing cannabis in one form or another, and there's too much access to it, and the information is just everywhere. I mean, when I met you, Rick, I used to have to hang out at Kinko's to make photocopies of Jack Herrera's book so I could go disseminate his information one fucking handout at a time. And now people can go download PDFs until they're blue in their face on something called a smartphone. It's totally a different platform when it comes to accessibility to information. And we have always believed that information was the key to our freedom, or at least I did. And that's why I was out there at the tables, at the colleges, on the stages, trying to convince people, hey, do some research, think for yourself. Personally, I think that's paying off. Personally, when I look around and see the approval ratings and the states passing laws, and maybe for me, I'm lucky because I've been doing this for a quarter century like you. I get little emails and messages from people that are like, hey, I read your book. Hey, you really inspired me. Hey, I do this and that now because I read about what you were doing. And I think there's a lot of that with everyone, and we all inspire each other, and now we have this massive movement on our hands that is in a way undeniable. So I don't know how long their effective delay strategies are really going to work with this huge tidal wave of support.
Well, to answer you, I would say I hope 5 years, but maybe it'll take another decade.
What about you, Rick? What do you think?
I think like 2025. Yeah, I think that I'd be surprised if it happens any sooner, because I think, the federal government is the last to change, and they only change when it's absolutely inevitable. And so there has to be successful examples of state legalization that go on for 1 or 2 presidential election cycles, I think, before. There's not that many politicians that are willing to stand up for legalization right now. And even medicalization. I mean, we don't have enough politicians ready to stand up to force Sessions to end the night of monopoly. So
no, I can see why.
Would you have predicted that recreational was legal in half a dozen states or 8 states, whatever it is? Would you have predicted that 5-10 years ago?
I'd say that's, being here in Massachusetts, I was a bit surprised that it passed because we had every single politician against it. And yet it passed. And so I'd say I'm a little surprised by where we're at right now. But I think if we have Canada successfully implement national legalization for non-medical use and have an experience of that right on our border for 4 or 8 years, that's going to make an enormous impact here in the U.S.
I heard if that passes in Canada, they won't allow you to cross the border unless you are a smoker.
Well, but to get back to medical marijuana just for a second, where a lot of us began. So if we're thinking that legalization is coming, if we can end the Sessions monopoly, what we're not calling it the NIDA monopoly or even the DEA monopoly. Now it's the Sessions monopoly. If we can end that, does it seem like it would be a good idea in theory to work through the FDA to make the plant into a medicine in smoked or vaporized form?
Yes, of course. People in the hospital should have, transdermal patches and things like that are going to help them absorb cannabinoids. There's no doubt that cannabis is a legitimate medicine that will be in a very standardized form with known cannabinoids. And, I believe in Lester Grinspoon's concepts of the ensemble effect. And I think that single molecules are not going to be the silver bullet to our healing. So there's going to have to be a change in the FDA in the way that they allow single molecule or multi-molecule drugs. Because if I'm correct, the FDA does not allow any drugs that are multi-molecule to be passed.
No, that's not the case. That isn't the case. They have a whole guidance on how to make botanicals into medicines. And again, the FDA, I don't think is the problem from a regulatory point of view. So, there's, for children who have diarrhea, there's a paregoric, I think there's an opium medicine that's a plant-based medicine for children for diarrhea because it's constipating. So the FDA wants to regulate botanical medicines. They see the botanical medicines are being sold when all sorts of claims are made out of them. They're exempt from certain FDA rules. The FDA wants to. And so I'd say the first step to trying to make marijuana plant into a medicine through the FDA is exactly this. Once we have a federally legal production, then to try to negotiate with FDA, will they accept a plant that, even if it's a clone plant, the different buds, according to how much sunlight they get in the plant, if there's a leaf over them or not, there's going to be slight variations in the cannabinoid content of different buds. But if it's from a clone plant, it's going to be more or less the same. And because of patient self-titration, people are going to be able to adjust their dose pretty quickly. So I think that's the key argument with FDA is, will they accept a plant as GMP, medical grade, even with some slight variations, more so than they permit with a molecule. So for example, for MDMA that we're having made right now, 1.5 kilograms in England of GMP MDMA, there can be no impurity greater than 0.15 of 1%. So about 1/7 of 1% is the largest impurity that you can have. And you can have a bunch of those. It still has to be at least 99% pure, but you can't have a single, and it has to, so the standardization that they can require of synthesized chemicals is a higher standard than they're going to get from a botanical grown product. But it's not clear to me that they won't accept a botanical product as a medicine.
You got to try. You got to try. I mean, for the simple fact that we know that just because recreational happens does not mean that 1 in 2 of us won't get cancer. So the reality is there was always going to be a need for the medicine, and there's going to be a need for the FDA to, make efficacious, safe, replicatable medicines so that I can get whatever I need here in California. If I happen to go to a pharmacy in Louisiana, I'll be able to pick that up, So they're already
allowing it from GW Pharmaceuticals, which is doing phase 3 studies, I believe, right now on one of its products. And that's plant-based. It's a plant-based extract.
But they're able to keep the THC CBD content the same by mixing and matching, so that it is plant-based.
Extract, you're correct, but it's already step one closer to anything else you're talking about.
Yeah, and the thing that's surprising to me, now I'm glad you brought up GW, is that you look at the stock market, the market cap value of GW, it's $2.7 billion. And they don't have that many sales. It's very confusing to me why people think that they're worth that much, particularly since a lot of their products, people would rather buy the marijuana plant, and it will work just as well if it's either smoked, vaporized, other, eaten. I don't understand quite why the marketplace.
Well,
and I think
as a shareholder of GW, I do own half of the outstanding shares. So I'm personally worth $1 billion, Rick. So I don't own a single share of GW. I'm just screwing with you.
Well, what do you think explains why they're worth so much? It's hard to imagine.
Because they were first.
Yeah, they're
the bottom line.
Yeah, they're the tip of the arrow.
They're talking about their only approach is taking it through the FDA approval process. Nobody else is willing to do that. They've done it in Canada, they've done it in Europe, and they're going to do it in the United States also.
Yeah, I've actually been sharing information with Alice Mead because she's their lawyer. And she was a little bit unaware of, the fact that once it's approved federally as a medicine, you still have to get it approved in all the states. And she was thinking of how big of a lobby effort that is. So we've already had an analysis done, and roughly half the states automatically reschedule, but the other half, you have to go through the legislature or you have to go through the Board of Pharmacy. So I shared all that information with her. And, she shared with me that their phase 3 study for Sativex failed. And so what they're working on now is
failed
the Epidiolex.
Failed where?
I wasn't sure if it was in the U.S. or England, but it failed to produce the results they wanted, and they weren't able to get it approved. I think it was.
I don't think it was in America, but because I'm not sure there was one for Sativex in America. But other places, if that happened, they just did it again and got it approved, because it is approved in Europe, Canada, and a bunch of other places.
Yeah, well, in the U.S., they're now looking for this Epidiolex, the CBD for epilepsy, and that's what's sort of saving them in the U.S., they think.
Whatever. I mean, I like the fact that they are plant-based instead of, some weird synthetic or laboratory-based like Unimed was for Marinol.
Yeah, I like that too. But they've refused to sell us the marijuana plant for studies comparing the plant to either their product or placebos, or they didn't want to.
What about Bedrocan, Rick?
They've not opened up a drug master file at the FDA. I don't know why they've decided not to, or maybe they're going to change their mind. But right now, I'm not aware of us being able to import Bedrocan into the U.S. for reasons.
Okay. And there's no opportunities from any of the companies in Israel?
No, none of them. They've just recently got permission to export, but I don't know that they have. There's none of them. I work with Yohai Golan with Can Pharmaceuticals Better, and they don't have yet a product that they've submitted to FDA. So that there's no Israeli company either that's done it.
Well, I saw the Israeli company is now taking over greenhouses in New Mexico. I saw that the other week.
Oh. Which one?
I thought it was Tikkun Olam.
Okay, that's a different one than Yohai's in. But yeah, I think Tikkun Olam is trying to do work in the U.S.
Oh yeah, they're working on licensing and everything. They're working in multiple states.
Yeah, and what Privateer has realized with Tilray and Nanaimo is that they're not going to be a low-cost producer because they've got too much lighting and heating expenses, and so that it will be in the American South or in the Negev Desert where the low-cost producers, or other countries, but it's not going to be Like, for example, if we get a license for Professor Craker at UMass Amherst, that would be more of a research facility than a large production facility. And the large production facilities would take place further in the south. Hold on just a second. I think that's my next meeting, unfortunately. I'll let them in, and then we'll talk just a bit. I'll be right back. Sorry.
I just want to point out, I don't know if any of you saw the Steep Hill study that was released yesterday on pesticide contamination in California.
Big surprise.
California cannabis clones.
On clones, yeah, that's a reality. I did see that study, Tom. I haven't looked too much into it, just reading just the abstract in itself. But I mean, it's not something that we haven't already been discussing here. It's just, without, any type of regulation and absence of, people are trying to get away with whatever they're going to get away with. And fortunately, there's actually some science and scientists who are getting hold of these realities and making people aware, that, because we've known this for a while, and it's a real problem, and now it's going to be a reality that has to be addressed. Is we need to have safe, clean producers from the get-go, and we don't currently.
Well, that's going to open up opportunities for new nurseries.
It also, there needs to be some sort of studies where it shows with each one of these particular pesticides or fungicides just how long the systemic life is. And if you make a small clone from a big mother that has this material in it, will it also have it? And if that's true, how many times will that carry through? I mean, can you make a clone of a clone of a clone and you're still going to frickin' find it? If so, we need to know so that this is common knowledge for all growers.
Well, I mean, it depends on what the what is, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. For each different compound, whether it's a pesticide or a fungicide, that's what we need to study and know for each one of them.
Right. Hey, Rick, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I wanted to thank you for coming on. I think if it wasn't for you doing this work, God knows there would be no one there doing it at all, it seems like sometimes. So I'm so glad that you have the energy of an Energizer Bunny, brother. I really do.
Well, this helps.
That's research. That's a research piece, right? Research. Well, I want to thank you, and I'd love to have you on whenever you have the time. I mean, you've got so much to say, and we haven't even touched on just even a grain of sand of the beach in which you're working on. So,
well, I'm really happy to be talking with you all, and I look forward to it again. And we'll have some thoughts pretty soon about whether we're able to pressure the VA to open the door to referrals for our marijuana PTSD study with Sue Sisley, and then I'd like to come back on and talk about how we can focus on sessions to break the government monopoly and different things we can do for that.
I think that's fantastic. I think we have to focus on the federal government as we did with states.
Yeah, and now I have to pivot to a different drug to work on our Boston site for MDMA for PTSD. So.
Well, you're doing good work, sir, and thank you very much.
And we wish you luck, and we wish you luck and success there, Rick.
Thank you very much. We're all inspiring each other. Everybody, you're all doing great.
And people can go to the maps.org website and find out more information about what the organization is doing.
Yeah, definitely. And you can find out both about the marijuana stuff, and I guess I'll just say that for the MDMA, we've gotten the top most approvals and permissions from FDA that you can get. We have what's called a special protocol assessment, which means after they say you can go to phase 3, we engaged in a 6-month process to go over every detail of the protocol, and that's resulted in an agreement letter. So that means that if we do these phase 3 studies and get results proving safety and efficacy, the FDA will approve the drug. The only condition is that no new safety issue arise. So we have agreement and special protocol assessment. We have this declaration of breakthrough therapy. That got us even a very positive article in Breitbart.com. by one of the veterans that we work with. So a lot of the veterans have all these incredible Republican connections. And so, you know, and I like to joke too that we had this great article in the Washington Post about breakthrough. It was the, you know, front page of the Sunday paper a couple weeks ago. And but the Washington Post is committed to journalism, and so that means they got some opposing voices. People saying, "Oh, you know, I'm worried this will send the wrong message to kids." But Breitbart, they don't think of themselves as normal journalists, so they don't go for balance. So their article was 100% positive. It was even better than the Washington Post article for us. And we've got Military Times, military.com, Stars and Stripes. So we're really generating a lot of bipartisan support. And we're estimating $25 million, and we have about 18 million of the 25 million already pledged or in hand, pledged in multi-year commitments or in hand. And yesterday I spoke to someone who runs a foundation that says that they do what's called impact investing, which means that they use the corpus, their main principal, and that they may give no interest loans. So if we have cash flow issues, if we've got it all covered over 5 years, but we're going to spend most of it in 3 years, then we might be able to get. So it's starting to come together. And we're starting in October some early training studies for the new co-therapy teams, the male-female co-therapy teams, for them to work with a PTSD patient. And then in April 2018, we're starting phase 3. And then a year later, it's similar to what the compassionate program that LV Musica and others have, the few of them that still have for marijuana, that now it's called expanded access. And so what it means is that if you're researching a drug, even though it's not through the system, if somebody has that condition and nothing else has helped them, they should have a right to try. And that's what the Republicans call it, right to try laws. Or and then the FDA is called expanded access. So people can pay for their own treatment. The pharmaceutical company sponsor, in this case, MAPS, can sell the drug, but just at cost. And so we may actually be able to set up psychedelic clinics throughout the United States in the summer to the end of 2019, even before 2021, when we say MDMA is going to be approved. So the big thing that we're doing between now and the end of February, which is our next board meeting, is to try to raise this additional $7 million. And then we'll be able to start phase 3 and just run through it as quickly as we can, because that's the least expensive way to do it. So it's pretty exciting, but we've been told that the VA is not going to fund it. The National Institute of Mental Health is not going to fund it. So in a sense, it's the gift of the psychedelic marijuana community to America, funding all this research with MDMA. And so we're pretty hopeful it's going to work out.
I hope it does. I mean, I think that, you know, it's funny, when I first met you and you were talking to me about all of your goals for MDMA research, I thought, I honestly don't want to say what I thought. I thought, man, this guy is as high as the drugs he's studying. And you've accomplished it, though, Rick. I mean, really, here we are 26 years or 25 years later, you know, and look at where you're at with it. And I think it's a huge benefit to so many. And I mean, I did take you seriously, but I thought your goals were just above the rainbow, and you know, and here you are. I mean, patience and perseverance has been your most sharpest tools. So yeah, you're wearing them down. You're doing a great job informing the base, and obviously it's working. So I mean, it's funny because I've always thought medical cannabis was so easy to comprehend that people would understand it was really palatable. But what you're doing with psychedelic research, and it's fantastic. And I for one, hope that you actually get the breaks that you need in order to show people that these things can really help them in so many elements of their life. So,
thank you. Yeah, I feel we've been getting pretty. I mean, the fact that the FDA gave us breakthrough therapy, you know, means that they're willing to stand up in public in a way where the other government agencies find out about it, and they're still willing to stand by it. So we're tremendous. And actually, I'll just say a funny thing is we learned last Friday, not a week ago yesterday, that there's a secret MDMA study being funded by the Army at blending MDMA with prolonged exposure. And it turns out that they don't want soldiers to know that they're doing it. because they are fearful that soldiers would think, oh, maybe they're doing research. Maybe I'm suffering from PTSD. I should try MDMA on my own. But and we weren't supposed to find out about it. Some Army guys slipped and told us about it. And then when we asked for more details, they wouldn't tell us. So we're not exactly sure what's going on. But even to the point of the Army wanting to check into this, I just think it's a really good step.
It's fantastic. You know, what going through the military does to so many people psychologically, you know, in any way we can counter that, it would be a good thing. I mean, I'm a peacenik, so I'm anti all that, but I acknowledge what the trauma is they're dealing with, and there should be tools there to help them with it.
Yeah.
You know, so cannabis, MDMA, whatever works type of thing, you know, let people have their inner sanity.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I look forward to coming back and joining you all again.
Well, thank you so much again, Rick. We look forward to seeing you back again anytime.
Okay, great. Bye, Todd. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Rick. Well, that was great. I've been a big fan of Rick's as much as I've been his friend. His work, I think, is important, and anyone that wants to donate to MAPS, it's a full nonprofit 501c3. Can just go to maps.org, check it out. They're a great organization to support, and they really deserve your support.
What's really funny is that psychedelics has probably gotten further through the hurdles than his cannabis work, because the federal government is just, you know, they just make it impossible for cannabis research.
Yeah, I felt the same way, Todd, is knowing him from back in '93, and when he was actually pitching the idea of actually getting psychedelics through. I mean, it was, yeah, we were all looking at, you know, you're high as hell, it's never going to happen. But, you know, we knew that he was serious because he was a doctor. He was doing through all the proper channels. And he has shown us by his own example of how to go through the entire process and destroy all of our preconceived notions along the way through, you know, going through, you know, becoming a doctor and realizing as a doctor he had to do things properly through the proper channels and exploring those. So those you that are watching, you can do the same thing. It's a long game, but his long game proved successful. Even though we were all kind of doubters, he went and proved it with all of our help and support along the way. Because I go back to Rick back when the 50th anniversary of LSD back in 1993. That was my first experience with him, and he was talking about this. And I had never done MDMA, much less to think that he was trying to take a psychedelic drug and get it through, you know, a research, or much less ever be successful. So kudos to him on the perseverance, and to all those people who have supported him and believed along the way and became believers along the way. So I support MAPS. I hope you guys do too. And, you know, as Todd was saying, maps.org, they can keep you up to date. You can get on their mailing list, and you can support exactly the research that they're doing, because they're going to break through for us all, and they have been. So much love to Rick and his entire support cast.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for coming on this weekend. It was always great to have you. Tom, it's always nice to have you on.
Thank you.
Do you have anything going on in the next week? What are you working on these days, Tom?
Me?
Are you doing more of that assessment work for the lawyers?
I'm consulting with some new growers, and the attorneys say they're going to keep me. This was the second time I did a appraisal, and they gave me some contacts to who are also litigators. So it's a new area. I haven't, you know, I've just done 2 of them, and because mostly I've done consulting with growers. So, but doing vegetable work this week. I'm switching up at the community garden to a bigger community garden plot, and putting in winter vegetables. I'm a plant holic.
Oh no, we just lost Tom. Oh my gosh.
He's a plant.
He's a plant. Well, there you go. He's a very happy plant. Well, then on that note, guys, I'm gonna say goodbye for this weekend. Thank you for joining us for this weekend's Talking Cannabis, and until next weekend, stay happy.